Tonight at 10, a dire warning on the impact of climate change from the head of the United Nations. As extreme weather batters the planet, the UN Secretary-General tells the BBC we are approaching a point of no return and climate change must be a priority again.
If we are not able to reverse the present trend that is leading to a catastrophe in the world, we will be doomed.
It comes ahead of COP27, a major climate conference in Egypt next month, also on the programme. On his first full day as Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak scraps more of Liz Truss's plans and he defends his reappointment of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary.
The Home Secretary made an error of judgment, but she recognised that. She raised the matter and she accepted her mistake.
He's so weak, he's done a grubby deal, trading national security because he was scared to lose another leadership election.
A sharp rise in the number of people crossing the Channel in small boats. More than 38,000 have arrived in the UK this year.
On BBC London, the NHS and London's crumbling hospitals, yet more pressing issues for the new PM. And disposable vapes, we look at the cost of not recycling them.
Good evening. The United Nations Secretary-General says the world is heading for a catastrophe unless climate change is prioritised. New figures released by the UN show concentrations of the three main greenhouse gases rose to record levels in the atmosphere last year. World leaders will meet next month in Egypt for the next UN Climate Summit, COP27. At last year's summit in Glasgow, COP26, a new global agreement was reached, the Glasgow Climate Pact, for countries to revisit and strengthen their current emissions targets by the end of this year. The plan was to reduce the use of coal, phase it down rather than phase it out. Money for developing countries would be significantly increased to help them cope with the effects of climate change and make the switch to clean energy. Our climate editor, Justin Rolat, reports from New York, where he has been talking to the UN Secretary-General.
It has been a year of extreme weather, devastating floods in Pakistan, drought in Somalia with millions threatened by famine, and record-breaking heat in the UK and many other countries. It's why the UN chief says climate is the most important issue in his in-tray.
Climate change is the crisis of our lifetime, is the defining issue of today's world. So climate change remains a central priority in everything we do. If we are not able to reverse the present trend that is leading to a catastrophe in the world, we will be doomed.
And a welter of new reports released by UN bodies today reveals the world's woeful progress on climate.
At the Glasgow conference, countries agreed to raise their carbon cutting game every year. Well, we've just got the figures in for this year, and just 24 out of 193 countries strengthened their plans. Now, if you take together all the pledges the world has made, we still see emissions increasing by 10% by 2030. Now, the science is very clear on this. It says emissions need to almost halve by 2030 to avoid the worst effects of climate change. So we are moving in the wrong direction.
It's the same story when you take an atmospheric perspective. Another new report shows concentrations of the main greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide, all hit record levels last year, with the biggest increase in methane ever recorded. It underscores the urgency of action.
Do you think the governments of the world recognise that?
Not necessarily all of them at the present moment. You have inflation, you have the consequences of the war, you have high prices of energy and food, you have then social unrest linked to that. So there has been indeed a tendency to put climate change in the back burner, and that is why it is so important to strongly advocate to bring back climate change to the centre of the international debate.
There have been fears some countries, including the UK, have been rolling back on some of their climate commitments. Liz Truss advised King Charles not to go to the UN Climate Summit in Egypt, for example.
Should the King go to COP27, do you want to see him there? And what about the new UK Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak? Do you want to see him there in Egypt?
I would like to see them both.
I'm sensing that you are slightly worried about the UK government's commitment on climate. If they need to be held to account by the people, it suggests that they're not perhaps...
There were some hints, but I hope that those hints do not correspond to the reality.
Some hints of a sort of loosening of the commitment.
Because things are changing also very quickly in the British political life, so let's be optimistic about the future.
This year, we've had a taste of the kind of extreme weather climate change can bring. The message from the UN today is clear. Unless we raise ambition in Egypt, the world will face far greater extremes.
Now, you might think Ukraine, global inflation or the breakdown in relations between America and China were the key geopolitical issues. But the UN chief says relations between the northern and southern hemispheres, between richer and poorer countries, are also at a dangerously low ebb. He said wealthy countries underestimate how angry the developing world is about the impacts of climate change and its failure to deliver cash to help out. He said the key word is trust. He told me unless we re-establish trust, it will not be possible to successfully tackle climate change.
Justin Rolat in New York. Thank you. And there's much more information about the climate change conference in Egypt next month on BBC News Online. That's bbc.co.uk/news, or you can also use the BBC News app. On his first full day as Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak has announced yet more unravelling of Liz Truss's plans. The ban on fracking in England is back in place after it was briefly lifted by the former Prime Minister. The government's economic statement, due to be delivered on Monday, has now been pushed back by almost 3 weeks to November the 17th. And we will have to wait until then to find out whether the state pension will still rise in line with prices, despite this being promised by Liz Truss. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak defended his decision to reappoint Suella Braverman as Home Secretary less than a week after she was forced to leave the role for a data breach. Our political editor, Chris Mason, has the details.
He used to pop out of this front door when he was Chancellor. Rishi Sunak and the rest of us will now be getting used to him coming out of this one, next door. The new Prime Minister had a lunchtime appointment in the House of Commons.
Prime Minister.
Conservatives have found their voices and smiles again. Even the benches got a bashing.
Mr. Speaker,
Can I just say, don't damage the furniture. Cheer him by all means, but don't damage. Come on.
May I welcome the Prime Minister. The first British Asian Prime Minister is a significant moment in our national story. And it's a reminder that for all the challenges we face as a country, Britain is a place where people of all races and all beliefs can fulfil their dreams.
But he then immediately questioned one of his first decisions.
Was his Home Secretary right to resign last week for a breach of security?
Prime Minister! The Home Secretary made an error of judgment, but she recognised that. She raised the matter and she accepted her mistake. And that's why I was delighted to welcome back into a united cabinet that brings experience and stability to the heart of government.
This time last week, Suella Braverman was out as Home Secretary, having used her personal email account to send government documents to a Conservative colleague not entitled to see them. So, Sir Keir asked, had officials raised concerns about Mrs Braverman getting her old job back? The Prime Minister ducked the question.
We can all see what's happened here. He's so weak, he's done a grubby deal, trading national security because he was scared to lose another leadership election.
Here was the reinstated Home Secretary turning up alongside her colleagues for the new Cabinet's first meeting this morning. Morning. New faces in new jobs, old faces in old jobs, and some old faces in new jobs.
Yesterday, he promised to...
Back in the Commons, another of Liz Truss's policies was being junked.
So if he is a man of his word, will he start by reversing the green light she gave to fracking?
Well, I've already said I stand by the manifesto on that.
Liz Truss liked the idea of fracking in England, drilling into the earth to extract gas, but the Conservative manifesto, their promises at the last election, said no. The biggest political contest to come, though, is about our finances.
The Tories have crashed the economy and now somebody has to pay for their mess.
I'm the first to admit that mistakes were made, and that's the reason I am standing here. Leadership is not selling fairy tales. It is confronting challenges, and that is the leadership the British people will get from this government.
The political landscape has changed. This is the image the government wants to project, with pictures of people on the same side actually getting on. Well, for now at least. The new Levelling Up Secretary, Michael Gove, even suggested today that boring is back. This from a bloke who was sacked in the summer, described as a snake, and then spent the last few weeks lobbing rocks at Liz Truss's government. What was noticeable today was the return of something we have not seen in a long time: normal. Remember that? So the Conservatives and Labour and others scrapping with one another rather than the Tories scrapping with themselves. But the challenges for Rishi Sunak are huge. There's that economic statement. It was meant to be next Monday. It's been pushed back to 3 weeks tomorrow. And big questions. So take state pensions, for instance. Will they rise in line with prices? Possibly, but it's not guaranteed yet. What about all benefits? Will they rise in line with prices? Again, likely, but not yet confirmed. Two of the many big decisions that have to be taken, and taken soon.
Chris Mason, thank you. So the government's long-awaited statement on its economic plan is being pushed back to Thursday, the 17th of November. The Chancellor said it was prudent to allow more time to get the most up-to-date economic forecasts. Our business correspondent, Darshini David, is here. Darshini.
Sophie, thank you. Yet another change of date means investors may be feeling the first chill of winter before they see that autumn statement. Crucially, can the Chancellor deliver stronger growth, fund tax cuts and get borrowing down? He says it'll be worth the wait.
Our number one priority is economic stability and restoring confidence that the United Kingdom is a country that pays its way. And for that reason, the medium-term fiscal plan is extremely important. And I want to confirm that it will demonstrate debt falling over the medium term.
Well, the government still faces a black hole, perhaps 30–40 billion pounds. That's close to what we spent on defence last year. And that's even after the reversal of most of September's tax cuts. There's also been recession warnings. What the Prime Minister admits is a profound economic crisis. Could a further delay to publishing its plans and the watchdog's assessment unleash market turmoil again? Well, maybe not. This is the cost of government borrowing, dictated by those bond markets. After soaring in the wake of the mini-budget, as investors feared those plans were too risky, those rates have fallen once again, as tax U-turns have underlined that this is not just a new Chancellor, but a new strategy. And it's this which may allow the government to unveil a brighter financial picture by delaying. If these rates are sustained, official projections could say that the government's bill for debt interest may be up to £10 billion lower than it might be deemed now, when forecasts would reflect the height of the angst over Liz Truss's plans. That could plug some of the spending hole. Those lower bond rates could also spell a reduction in fixed-rate mortgage deals, down from the current average of 6.5%, meaning less of an economic squeeze on hundreds of thousands of households who'll soon have to remortgage. Meanwhile, this delay could have other implications.
So there's a little bit more time now and a full autumn statement. That may mean more decisions can be made, and in particular decisions specific to individual departments, how much money education, health and so on will get. That would have been really hard to do by Monday. Still hard to do in 2 weeks, but at least possible.
Well, the currency markets do like the scope for more detailed plans. The pound is up by more than 10 cents against the dollar from the lows reached after the mini-budget. But could the Chancellor use this time to explore wider options? Rather than squeezing spending on services, could he look to higher taxes, perhaps on businesses who've benefited from the recent turmoil on energy and financial markets? Well, whatever's revealed next month, the Prime Minister knows economic stability means more than navigating the current crisis. It'll mean boosting long-term prosperity in a way that's evaded many of his predecessors. Sophie.
Darshini, thank you. There's been another sharp rise in the number of people crossing the Channel in small boats this year. More than 38,000 people have already made the journey to the UK, compared with 28,500 last year. And of the migrants who arrived here last year, almost none of them have had their application for asylum processed. The UK's asylum system is now costing more than £2 billion a year. Our home editor Mark Easton reports.
Wait, and go. Children pulled aboard an RNLI lifeboat from the English Channel just a few weeks ago.
Breathing.
Breathing, walking. Distressing images illustrating the challenge posed by record numbers of migrants trying to reach the Kent coast in flimsy boats. For a Brexit campaigner like Suella Braverman, who promised to take control of Britain's borders, every arrival is an embarrassment. But the situation's also a huge practical challenge for the Home Secretary, because currently her department simply cannot cope. On arrival, migrants are taken here, a short-term holding centre at Manston in Kent. Designed for 1,000, there were 2,800 people at the facility on Monday when the Independent Inspector of Borders paid a visit to the overflow tents hurriedly erected in the grounds. Today, MPs were told conditions at Manston were so dangerous the inspector had been left speechless and had written to warn the Home Secretary.
I spoke to an Afghan family who had been in a marquee for 32 days with kit mats on the floor, with blankets, for 32 days. And a Syrian family who'd been there for 2 weeks as well, the mother of who was terribly distressed because she didn't know where they were going. So this is a pretty wretched conditions.
Home Office officials say the nationalities of those crossing the Channel is changing, with Albanians now the #1 category. In 2020, just 50 Albanians arrived in small boats. Last year, it was 800. This year already, it's 12,000. And of that number, 10,000 are single men, representing more than 1% of Albania's adult male population arriving in the UK this year.
The rise has been exponential, and we think that is in the main due to the fact that Albanian criminal gangs have gained a foothold in the north of France, and they've begun facilitating very large numbers of migrants.
The Home Office says Albanian crime groups organise travel for people looking to reach the UK. Planes bound for Belgium, they say, are arranged for the express purpose of getting people into small boats. The new Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, wants many more migrants to be prosecuted for illegally arriving in Kent. She's also enthusiastic about the scheme to send asylum seekers to Rwanda and would actually like to see the scheme expanded. And she also wants to prevent the European Court of Human Rights from being able to stop flights. With the Rwanda scheme stalled in the courts and 100,000 people stuck in the asylum system, many migrants are being housed in hotels like this one in Scarborough. The cost? Almost £7 million a day. Hold the line! With government systems gridlocked, the RNLI keeps training crews for rescuing migrants from the Channel. There are no quick fixes to what was described to MPs today as a really dangerous situation. Mark Easton, BBC News.
In India, there's been huge pride since Rishi Sunak became the first British Prime Minister of Indian descent. It's raised hopes of improved relations between the two countries and the revival of a delayed free trade deal. However, Mr Sunak's reappointment of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary has also proved controversial in India, where many were offended by her claim earlier this month that Indians in the UK are overstaying their work visas. Our South Asia correspondent Rajini Vaidyanathan reports.
In this ever-changing nation, they're reflecting on a milestone. One their ancestors would never have thought was possible. More than 75 years ago, India was ruled by the British. Now, a person of Indian origin is running Britain. At this market in the capital, Delhi, there's been a sense of pride at Rishi Sunak's rise.
We are overwhelmed because, the UK has been ruling us in the past, so it feels great. It's kind of a circle has come complete,
Reverse colonization seems to be happening. They've ruled us for such a long time, and now that a person, a brown person, is there at the helm of affairs and he'll be dictating terms to the country, I mean, it does feel good.
Rishi Sunak is the UK's new Prime Minister, the first...
And that feeling's been reflected in the wall-to-wall TV coverage here in India. Nidhi Razdan's one of the country's best-known anchors at the NDTV network. Her newsroom's covering every twist and turn of the Sunak premiership. UK cabinet reshuffles rarely make the headlines here.
I think that honeymoon where that whole India connection and the family connection and the Hindu-ness, that's fine. But now we've got to see, will he walk the talk? He's appointed someone like Suella Braverman back as Home Secretary, which isn't sending a great message, actually, when you look at her stand on immigration and her stand on the free trade agreement with India.
Many in this country didn't take kindly to her comments that Indians were the largest group overstaying their visas in the UK.
A few days ago on Diwali, Rishi Sunak's appointment was heralded as a bright new future for UK-India relations. But now, as the festivities wind down, that sense of pride has shifted to the political reality.
Thank you very much. 6 months ago, and it was another Tory Prime Minister making headlines here. Boris Johnson pledged to secure a trade agreement with India by this week. But the UK and India have yet to wrap up a deal. As a former Prime Ministerial advisor, Sanjay Abaru knows a thing or two about these kinds of negotiations. Does he think the return of Suella Braverman makes a difference?
In terms of public image, I think Rishi Sunak has taken a bit of a hit because of not just her statements, but the fact that she had to resign and that she has taken her back, doesn't go well.
On the day he entered number 10, Rishi Sunak wore a sacred Hindu thread on his right wrist. But will his personal ties make an impact on the political and the much-awaited trade deal with India? Rajini Vaidyanathan, BBC News, Delhi.
Now a look at some other stories making the news today. Iranian security forces have opened fire on protesters in several cities, including Tehran, who were marking 40 days since the death in custody of Mahsa Amini. She was accused of wearing her hijab incorrectly. In her hometown, thousands of people marched to her grave, many of them shouting death to the dictator. President Putin has overseen Russia's annual exercises involving strategic nuclear forces amid growing fears of an escalation of the war in Ukraine. The Kremlin said that ballistic and cruise missiles had been fired on land, sea and in the air. The Foreign Secretary James Cleverly has said that LGBT football fans who attend the World Cup in Qatar should be willing to show some compromise. He told LBC that anyone travelling to the tournament should be respectful of the host nation, where same-sex activity is illegal. Labour called the remarks tone-deaf. The billionaire Elon Musk has posted a video of himself entering Twitter's San Francisco headquarters carrying a sink, just days ahead of a court-ordered deadline to close his $44 billion deal for the social media platform. Earlier in the day, Mr. Musk updated his Twitter profile biography to Chief Twit. Now, in just under 2 weeks, Americans will take to the polls in the US midterm elections when all seats in the House of Representatives are up for grabs, as well as a third of seats in the Senate. One major issue having a big impact on voter enthusiasm across both parties is the Supreme Court ruling this summer, which overturned the long-held constitutional right to abortion. 13 states have already severely restricted abortion rights, and these elections will determine the future of legal abortion in several other states. Our North America editor Sarah Smith reports from Michigan.
Tim Drager often uses his private plane to fly cancer patients to hospital.
Clear prop!
Now he's volunteering to transport pregnant women from states which have banned abortion to places where they can terminate a pregnancy. In Michigan, abortion is legal for now. Across the US, 13 states have severely restricted abortion, some with no exceptions for rape or incest. and it's become a major election issue.
What does it say about America when people see what's been happening to abortion laws in some states?
You know, we're the country that espouses freedom. We say we have freedom of choice for a lot of things. Here, I have to use that same freedom to help women find the freedom that they deserve, that they've had for 50 years. They should have that freedom everywhere, and that's what I hope we can push.
At St Mary's Catholic Church, politics have now made their way into the pews.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and
Here
of
in
the
Michigan,
Holy
there is a
Spirit.
special
Amen.
proposition on the ballot asking voters if they want to guarantee abortion rights for women. And the priest is organising the opposition.
It is one thing to kill a person, but to kill one's own child is another dimension of evil.
For anti-abortion advocates as well as pro-choice campaigners, abortion is central to this election campaign.
It's really not that difficult to see on at least a grave moral issue like this one, what you need to do and how you should vote. We think the fundamental right is not abortion, but life.
The right to access an abortion was overturned by the Supreme Court in June, and now the battle over what the law should be is being fought out state by individual state.
Why is it a right to kill your own child?
Abortion has to become unthinkable. People have to really realize what it actually is, and I think people that are for abortion don't really understand.
We've lost the whole idea of life as sacred. I mean, that's a gift from God.
Abortion has always been one of the most divisive issues in America, but this is the first time in almost 50 years that voters can have their say. In states like Michigan, huge numbers of women have been registering to vote, vastly outpacing new male voters. And that's because this year, abortion rights are specifically on the ballot.
Thank you for what you're doing.
As Democrats organise their campaigns, they're focusing on reproductive rights. Instead of the rising cost of living, they would much rather warn voters about the strict abortion limits many Republicans advocate.
To go to a total ban that doesn't have any exceptions for rape or incest, that says if you're having a miscarriage, you have to wait until you're deathly ill to get a procedure. That is not something we're going to allow here because it rolls us so deeply backwards.
Lead us not into temptation.
Anti-abortion activists have been campaigning for decades, and it's long been an issue Republicans could use to rally their base. But now it could cost them votes.
Our body, our choice!
The furious backlash to the removal of abortion rights is energising large numbers of voters who are determined to make their voices heard in the polling booths. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Lansing, Michigan.
Cricket now, and England have suffered a major blow to their chances of reaching the knockout stages of the Men's T20 World Cup after a shock defeat to Ireland. England are one of the tournament favourites, but the collapse of the top batting order and the intervention of rain at the match in Melbourne meant they lost by 5 runs. They now need to beat Australia, New Zealand and Sri Lanka in their remaining games to guarantee progression. Liverpool have secured their place in the last 16 of the Champions League after victory at Ajax, but Rangers are all but out of Europe after defeat at Napoli. Tottenham will have to wait to secure their place in the knockout stages after being held to a draw by Sporting Lisbon. Nesta McGregor reports.
In a group so tight all 4 teams could still make the knockout stages, Tottenham's fate was at least in their own hands. A win and they'd be in the last 6. McGregor, BBC News.
Time for a look at the weather now. Louise Lear is here, and it's very warm for some today.
Yeah, so if you really don't have to look very far at the moment, do you, to see the signs of climate change. These are the temperatures we should be having in late October. Look what we're going to expect tomorrow. Everywhere seeing above average temperatures, and in the southeast we could see temperatures 22 degrees as a high, 72 Fahrenheit. That's more akin to a June day rather than late October. The wind direction is the key factor, coming all the way up from Africa, and it's not just the UK that's experiencing this warmth. Temperatures in Central Europe a good 10 degrees above average as well. Here, high pressure keeping it dry. For us, it's a different story. Yes, it's going to be mild, but at times we've still got some wet and windy weather to come. And in fact, the first signs of that arriving into the southwest during the evening and overnight. We'll see some rain, some of it heavy as it pushes its way steadily north. There'll be a lot of low cloud. There'll be some mist and fog as well. A very mild start for many. Clearer skies further north and east in Scotland. That's where the best of the morning sunshine, but it's not expected to last as that rain continues to drift its way steadily northwards. It will weaken off just a touch and then allow for some sunshine to come through. And so with some lengthy spells of sunshine, we could see temperatures up as high as 21, 22 degrees. That's 72 Fahrenheit. But another very mild day for the time of year. More wet and windy weather to come, however, on Friday. Still the wind direction coming from the south, but gales are likely with that rain. So as it continues to push its way steadily north, and some of that on Friday will be much heavier than Thursday's rain. But behind it, again, brightening up, some sunshine coming through. And once again, those temperatures still really, really mild for the end of October. There you go, Sophie.
Louise, thank you. And that's it from us. There's more on today's main stories on Newsnight with Victoria Derbyshire, which is just getting underway on BBC Two. Here, though, on BBC One, it is time to join our teams across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Good night.